It was back in September 23rd, 2021 that Nintendo hosted the following Nintendo Direct, which is where they announced that they'd be expanding upon the Switch Online service by adding N64 and Sega Genesis games, and they relayed back then that there would be new content alongside a new membership plan. Now, the fact that they didn't detail the business and pricing model of the expanded Switch Online had me concerned that maybe Nintendo knew people wouldn't be happy with whatever solution they had. And while the library of N64 games that would launch with this expansion to Switch Online was pretty compelling, with more yet to come, unfortunately, when they finally did announce the pricing model, it was something that a lot of people were not happy by, to the point where the video now has 95,000 dislikes versus a mere 17,000 likes. And you can see right here from the original $20 all the way to $50, which is more than double the original price. And then for family membership, you are going from $35 to $80, which is also more than double. The general consensus is that the expansion doesn't offer enough to justify more than doubling the price for both types of memberships. You're getting only a handful of N64 games, only a handful of Sega Genesis games, and given the infrequency of releases for NES and SNES games as part of the Switch Online service, there are suspicions that the N64 and Sega Genesis library won't be updated as frequently as people would like, which further diminishes the value. So the backlash was swift and immediate, but there were still some who were thinking about getting the expanded subscription for the convenience of being able to play some of these classics in a hybrid portable home console fashion, which is a compelling prospect and one of the reasons why Nintendo really needs to nail this version of Virtual Console, because the Switch is kind of the perfect hardware because you can take it on the go to have all these libraries of classic games in one convenient place. But the latest unfortunate news surrounding all of this is that the emulation surrounding N64 games has not been ideal. It's not been working as well as people would like, and people have been posting all about it on Twitter with, for example, Twitter user CLGZFG saying, "Holy shit, Ocarina of Time on Switch is so bad, it might actually be worse than Wii U Virtual Console." And this is a speedrunner of Ocarina of Time, so this individual certainly knows how this game's supposed to feel. And issues with the Switch Online version of Ocarina of Time begins with graphical differences that actually makes the game look worse than the N64 version. So here's a Twitter user who posted Ocarina of Time N64 versus Wii Virtual Console versus Switch. So clicking on this, here we have the N64 version, which, looks fairly standard, what you'd expect from that version of the game. Here we have the Wii version, which looks a little sharper and it's widescreen, stretched out. And then finally, look at the reflections here, look at the fog in the back and the lack thereof in this screenshot that showcases the Switch version. Just look at the water, and the lack of fog in the back just has this sharp line that is very visible, indicating where the floor ends. Whereas going back to the Wii Virtual Console version, you can see how much smoother that transition is and how much moodier the fog makes everything look, alongside the reflection with the tree here. Even the N64 version, looking back at it, has that fog effect with the reflection, and now with the Switch version, it's just there are visual elements that are straight up missing, and it makes it the worst version of this game. As John Linman from Digital Foundry explained it, looks like there are fog and transparency issues with the Switch emulation solution, which seems to be based on the 3D All-Stars emulator. Looks like it doesn't quite work well with all games yet. Not great. That emulator for 3D All-Stars was designed seemingly around Mario N64, and they took that and are trying to use it for all the other games as well, but they haven't retrofitted it quite well enough where the N64 games, all of them, are emulated appropriately. The emulation that Nintendo's got going on here is actually behind the other emulators that are out there made by third-party entities, essentially. Beyond graphical issues, there are also bugs and crashes that were just not present in the original game. Here's a Twitter user and a speedrunner going by the name Mutant Aura who just tweeted "ha ha ha ha" with the following video, which I'll maximize and show you what that looks like. So, as this player is running around, you'll notice that Link's model is just glitching all over the place. Then comes the lag, and the frame rate stuttering that occurs right before the software closes because of a crash, because of an error. Now, it is pointed out that Mutant Aura that this case seems to be a speedrunner specific case, as this individual was trying a glitch that works on Wii and got a funny result on Switch, so the average Joe perhaps won't be experiencing this kind of crash. But there are gripes with this game that's pointed out by Mutant Aura that your average Joe might experience. I have other gripes with the core emulator, such as input lag plus controls, but this was a funny clip, nothing more. And speaking of input lag, here is yet another speedrunner going by the name Tofool, who showed a video that highlights that input lag. You can see that it's subtle, but after he presses and lifts his fingers, it takes just a little too long for that input to register for Link to actually execute that backflip, when it should happen a bit more immediately. And the tweet here reads, the input lag in Ocarina of Time on Switch Online is even worse than SM64, it feels like. Just look at this. And a lot of people agree. There were some who raised the possibility that maybe it had to do with the controller that he was using or the TV that he was using, but Tofu debunked this by showing videos of Ocarina of Time running on an N64 on a CRT TV versus Ocarina of Time running on a low latency monitor on Switch, and apparently he insists that I promise that you can feel the difference if you have access to both ways of playing. And to prove this issue even further, Tofu showed gameplay of Ocarina of Time on Switch with the Joy-Cons attached, which should generate the least amount of input delay, but he insists that the input delay is the same, it's still there, and it feels significantly or noticeably worse than just playing on an N64 or in a more ideal version of this game. Now, Tofu closes off by saying, and yes, this is not a big deal to most people, but for speedrunners, this sucks. And even your average enthusiast might notice that input lag, especially given this is a game that already runs at like 15 frames per second. We're still looking at a scenario where this is the worst version of Ocarina of Time to play. The price was already getting enough backlash. The fact that the games aren't working as they should, that's just going to add gasoline to the fire. And there are other strange oversights, like, for example, Mario Kart 64. This is a game that required a controller pack in order to save ghost data, and you are prompted to insert the N64 controller pack into the controller when trying to use this feature, but obviously there's no such thing for the Nintendo Switch, and even if you buy that controller that Nintendo's selling as part of the inclusion of N64 games on Switch Online, you'll notice that the back is filled up. You cannot buy your own expansion pack and put that in there. So what you're looking at here is a scenario where an entire feature of this game cannot be accessed in the Switch version because of this oversight, making this essentially a worse version of Mario Kart 64. Something else that Nintendo failed to consider is implementing the means to remap buttons. Because of the difference between the Switch button layout and the N64 button layout, where the N64 controller has 6 face buttons, A, B, and then the 4 directional C buttons, it's paved the road to some compatibility issues, like Sin and Punishment, for example. You want to hit the left and right C buttons to strafe around, but the way it's laid out on Switch's N64 emulation is that the right C button is mapped to the top rather than to the right, and so there's just that disconnect where you're not hitting left and right, you're hitting left and up to go left and right. And as pointed out here by Blessing from Kind of Funny Games, the button mapping for N64 on Switch is so terrible that I'm still in disbelief that there's no option to remap. Now, you could hold down the ZR button and that will turn the face buttons into the C buttons on the N64 controller, but that obviously creates certain inconveniences with certain games where it's just not a comfortable controller layout. And it's not just Sin and Punishment, there are a number of games that just, controller-wise, don't do very well with the layout that's default, and because you cannot remap the buttons, that just really exacerbates this issue that could have been resolved if people were offered that customization option. A potential solution is to buy the N64 controller, but you can see that they're out of stock, they're likely being scalped all over, and they're pretty difficult to get right now. So a lot of people, most people, will be stuck with the default Switch controllers, be it the Joy-Cons or the Pro controller. Now, there are others who have reported lag issues when playing with other players online. So here's Mario Kart N64, and the audio in particular will really highlight the problem. So there is a huge amount of lag here, but there is the possibility that these users just have really bad internet connection, because there are other Twitter users like Zyphos here who has shown the game running pretty smoothly online. This is despite a connection that spans from Scotland to America, which is a fairly long distance, and yet the gameplay for this individual was pretty smooth. But there is another Twitter user who pointed out that part of the issue has to do with Nintendo's own netcode. As expected, the N64 emulator implements the same lockstep netcode everyone must be in perfect sync that Nintendo really loves to use. It seems that emulation is paused while other players catch up, causing the choppy audio. So Nintendo's netcode isn't helping mitigate connections that may be slower or less stable. And there are definitely instances where users have posted videos of bad connection and laggy gameplay, but have straight up admitted that they're in a college dorm with a pickle for a router. But Nintendo's netcode, again, just doesn't help smooth that out. To close things off, here's a comment published on Nintendo Live's article on this from a user who kind of spotlighted and bullet pointed the issues that they've seen people report. And among these issues are input lag, especially visible in Mario 64, and also Zelda Ocarina of Time, frame rate issues found in Mario 64, Star Fox 64, Yoshi's Story, audio reproduction lag, texture issues, weird key settings, missing detection of the controller pack, and then as far as Ocarina of Time goes, total lack of fog effects, missing objects, random crashes. The fact of the matter is that emulation on Switch Online Plus expansion is clearly not perfect. And when you've got that price point of more than double that of Switch Online without expansion, you at the very least expect that the emulation would be on point, especially given this is the official emulation release from Nintendo, and the fact that their emulation is worse than all the third-party stuff out there that Nintendo has been going out of their way to shut down is the reason why Nintendo's struggling in their battle against, piracy or emulation. If Nintendo wants people to spend money on the official versions of these releases rather than just emulate existing versions of those games, then they need to offer a better service that functions better, that is priced adequately. But lacking all of that, of course there will be a number of people who would take to just emulating the games on, their computers or phones instead, because they just run better, they look better, there are more customization options for graphics and controller and audio, and you can really tweak the settings to whatever you want. N64 emulation in particular is something that's been figured out for ages now, and Nintendo just seems to be behind on that front while also charging way more money than they currently can afford to. And that's why you get tweets like this where people are jokingly posting how they got the Switch Online expansion pack and it's just Ocarina of Time running on their computer through emulation, which is a better and less flawed way to play this game than Nintendo's own official Switch expansion pack version of N64 releases. So yeah, suffice to say that I'm very glad that I decided to pass on this expansion for Switch Online subscription, and that's how I'll feel until there is a far more expanded library of these games, and until Nintendo makes sure that all of them run adequately and all of the different oversights and ways that they didn't consider certain scenarios like the Mario Kart expansion pack are all ironed out. But until then, at this price point and at this quality, the Switch Online Plus expansion subscription is just something that is incredibly difficult to recommend in the current state of affairs. But that's just one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the latest developments surrounding Switch Online Plus expansion N64 games, what your experience has been like if you decided to check it out and try it out. Share your comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.